Hey there, night wanderers. Before you drift off tonight, let me shatter everything you think you know about ancient Rome. Forget the marble statues, the noble gladiators, and the pristine togas. Tonight, we're diving into the real Rome, where most people lived in fire traps, used communal toilet sponges, and survived on gray porridge that would make prison food look gourmet. Spoiler alert, it was nothing like Gladiator. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Roman diet, more than just bread and circuses. The average Roman citizen consumed about 3,000 calories a day, more than most Americans eat today. But here's the twist that'll make your stomach turn. Most of those calories came from a single food that would make your modern stomach revolt. A gray, lumpy porridge called pulse, made from whatever grains, legumes, and scraps they could afford, boiled into a mixture that had all the visual appeal of wet concrete and roughly the same texture. Picture this grotesque breakfast reality. You'd wake up to a bowl of what looked like chunky gray paste, sometimes with mysterious bits floating in it that you'd rather not identify. The smell? Imagine wet cardboard mixed with the faint aroma of whatever vegetables were going bad in the market yesterday. Romans would try to mask this culinary nightmare with garum, that fermented fish sauce I mentioned, which was basically the ketchup of the ancient world, except it smelled like a fishing boat that had been sitting in the sun for a week. But let's really dive into the horror show that was garum production, because understanding this condiment is key to understanding Roman taste buds, or complete lack thereof. Garum wasn't just fermented fish sauce. It was rotted fish guts left to decompose in the Mediterranean sun for months, until they achieved a consistency somewhere between motor oil and liquid death. The process began with fish entrails, heads, bones, scales, internal organs, mixed with coarse salt and left in large clay vats. The fermentation process was managed by professional garum makers who had developed iron stomachs and presumably no sense of smell. They would stir the putrefying mixture daily, monitoring its progress like winemakers watching their vintages. The premium garum was made from tuna entrails, while cheaper versions used whatever fish scraps were available, including species we wouldn't feed to our cats today. After several months of controlled decomposition, the resulting liquid was strained and graded. The finest garum, called garum sociorum, was clear, amber-colored, and cost more than good wine. It was supposedly delicious, with a complex umami flavor that enhanced everything it touched. But the budget versions available to ordinary Romans were murky, chunky liquids that contained unidentifiable floating particles and smelled like low tide at a polluted harbor. Romans put this stuff on everything. It was their salt, their soy sauce, their hot sauce, and their flavor enhancer all rolled into one horrific condiment. They mixed it with wine to make inaugurum, combined it with pepper for a spicy sauce, and even ate it straight as a snack. Children were fed garum from infancy, developing a taste for fermented fish that would horrify modern parents. The imperial feast, a world apart. The wealthy, of course, had a completely different experience. While the common people choked down their daily portion of edible cement, rich Romans feasted on dishes that would make modern food critics weep with envy. We're talking about peacocks roasted with their feathers put back on for display, dormice stuffed with honey and pine nuts, and exotic fruits shipped from the far corners of the empire at astronomical cost. A single imported peach could cost more than a laborer's monthly wages. But the elaborate wealthy dining wasn't just about nutrition. It was performance art designed to demonstrate power and cultural sophistication. A typical aristocratic dinner party involved 9 courses, each more elaborate than the last. The gustachio, appetizer, might include sea urchins from Britain, ostrich eggs from Africa, and honey-glazed dormice that had been fattened in special clay pots. The prima mensa, main course, could feature roasted flamingo, the tongue was considered the finest part, wild boar stuffed with live birds that would fly out when carved, and fish so fresh they were still swimming in portable tanks when served. The preparation methods were as important as the ingredients. Roman chefs developed techniques that wouldn't be seen again until the Renaissance. They knew how to stuff animals inside other animals. A chicken inside a duck, inside a goose, inside a pig, creating turducken ancestors that required days of preparation. They made sauces from ingredients that had traveled thousands of miles, combining Indian pepper with African silphium and British honey to create flavor profiles that existed nowhere else on Earth. But perhaps most shocking was the casual waste. A wealthy Roman dinner party might feature 100 different dishes, most of which would barely be touched. Guests were expected to sample everything but finish nothing, leaving tables covered with barely tasted delicacies that represented more food than poor families would see in a year. The leftovers weren't saved. They were thrown away or fed to animals because reheated food was considered beneath aristocratic dignity. But the most shocking part? Even slaves in wealthy households often ate better than free citizens struggling in the crowded insulae. A house slave might enjoy leftovers from elaborate dinner parties, scraps of roasted meat, fine bread, diluted but decent wine, while a free Roman citizen working as a day laborer would return home to the same bowl of pulse porridge, night after night, year after year. The psychological effects of this food inequality were profound. Poor Romans developed a relationship with hunger that was both accepting and resentful. Children learned early that complaining about food was pointless and potentially dangerous. It marked you as ungrateful and could result in getting even less. But they also learned to fantasize about the elaborate meals they could smell wafting from wealthy districts, creating a form of culinary torture that was inescapable in a city where rich and poor lived in close proximity. Waking up in ancient Rome, 150 AD. Take a deep breath. Let the weight of your day settle into your pillow. Tonight, we're traveling back nearly 2,000 years, to a world where the scent of olive oil and burning incense filled the air, where the sound of sandaled feet echoed through marble corridors, and where life moved to a rhythm completely unlike anything you've ever known. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine you're waking up not to an alarm clock, but to the gentle murmur of voices in the street below. The year is 150 AD, during the reign of Emperor Antoninus Pius. The Roman Empire stretches from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to Syria. You are living at the absolute peak of human civilization, or so everyone believes. But as you'll discover tonight, the reality of daily life in ancient Rome was far more complex, far more human, and in many ways far more relatable than the marble statues and epic movies would have you believe. Strip away the togas and the gladiators, the emperors and the conquests, and what you find are people remarkably like yourself, worried about money, devoted to their families, trying to find meaning and pleasure in the midst of uncertainty. The room around you is small, smaller than your modern bathroom. The walls are painted in rich reds and golds, decorated with simple frescoes of garden scenes. Vines heavy with grapes twist around painted columns, and small birds seem to flutter just beyond reach. There's no glass in the window, just wooden shutters that you closed last night against the cool air. The floor beneath your feet is cold stone, covered with a simple woven mat that's seen better days, but still provides a barrier against the chill. You stretch, feeling the stiffness in your joints. There's no mattress as you know it, just a wooden frame with leather straps, topped with a thin stuffed cushion and a woolen blanket. Your pillow is filled with feathers if you're lucky, straw if you're not. The wealthy might have silk covers imported from distant China, but most Romans made do with undyed wool that scratched against their skin and held the smell of the sheep it came from. Outside, Rome is already stirring. It's just before dawn, and you can hear the rumble of carts delivering goods to the markets. During daylight hours, wheeled traffic is banned from the city center. Too many people, too narrow streets. So everything happens in the dark hours before sunrise. Deliveries of grain from Egypt, wine from Gaul, olive oil from Spain, exotic spices from India. The city feeds on the wealth of an empire, but it does so in darkness. The sound of water trickling reaches your ears. Not from a faucet, those don't exist yet. Instead, it's the constant flow from the public fountain in the courtyard below. Rome is famous for its aqueducts, those massive stone channels that carry fresh mountain water across hundreds of miles of countryside. But even with this marvel of engineering, most people don't have running water in their homes. You'll need to go downstairs with a clay jug to collect what you need for washing and drinking. But let's talk about what this simple morning water collection really meant in the social fabric of Roman life, because it reveals layers of complexity that most people never consider. The public fountains weren't just utilitarian structures. They were the nerve centers of neighborhood life. information networks that rivaled any modern social media platform in their ability to spread news, gossip, and crucial survival information. The timing of your water collection determined everything about your day and your social status. The wealthy sent slaves at dawn when the water pressure was strongest and the fountains cleanest. Middle-class citizens like Marcus had to time their visits carefully, balancing work schedules against water quality. The poor often waited until evening, accepting murky water that had been contaminated by a day's worth of use, dirt, and worse. The water itself told stories about the empire's reach and vulnerability. On good days, it was crystal clear mountain water that had traveled hundreds of miles through some of the most sophisticated engineering projects in human history. But when aqueducts needed maintenance, or when barbarian raids disrupted the supply lines, the fountains would run brown with sediment, or worse, stop flowing entirely. Romans learned to read watercolor like a newspaper, understanding that cloudiness might signal problems hundreds of miles away. The social dynamics around the fountains were as complex as any royal court. There were unwritten rules about who could access which fountain when, based on neighborhood hierarchies that had developed over generations. Veterans got priority, pregnant women were shown deference, and newcomers to the area had to prove themselves worthy of acceptance into the water collection community. The conversations that occurred during these daily gatherings shaped Roman society in ways that formal political institutions never could. This is where ordinary citizens learned about new laws, economic changes, and military campaigns. It's where marriages were arranged, business partnerships formed, and political opinions shaped. A skilled water collector could gather more useful intelligence in a morning fountain visit than a senator might learn in a week of formal meetings. But perhaps most remarkably, the fountain communities developed their own systems of quality control and resource management that were more effective than anything the imperial bureaucracy could devise. Regulars would monitor water quality, report problems to authorities, and organize cleaning efforts when needed. They created informal rationing systems during shortages and established security protocols to prevent contamination or sabotage. The Roman wardrobe, a social statement. You swing your legs over the side of the bed, and immediately your bare feet meet the shock of cold stone. There's no central heating, no radiators, no thermostats. If you're fortunate enough to live in a house rather than an apartment building, you might have a brazier, a metal bowl filled with burning charcoal. But fuel is expensive, and many Romans simply layer on more clothing when the temperature drops. The first task of every Roman morning is the same: deciding what to wear. Your options are limited but practical. For undergarments, you have a simple linen tunic that reaches your knees. Over this, if you're a man, goes the toga, that famous draped garment that looks so elegant in statues but is actually incredibly difficult to put on correctly. If you're a woman, you'll wear a stola, a long dress that covers you from neck to ankles, held in place with pins and brooches. But here's what the movies never show you. Getting dressed in ancient Rome is a social activity. You can't put on a toga by yourself. The complex draping requires at least one other person, often a slave or family member who's learned the intricate folding techniques. The cloth is heavy, about 6 yards of wool, and if you don't arrange it properly, it will fall off at the most embarrassing moment. And let me tell you, toga malfunctions were a real social catastrophe. Imagine you're at an important business meeting, trying to impress a potential patron, when suddenly 6 yards of expensive wool decides to unravel itself in front of everyone. It happened to senators, merchants, even emperors on occasion. There were actually professional toga adjusters, slaves who specialized in the art of draping, and wealthy Romans would never leave home without one. The process itself was like getting dressed by committee. First, you'd need to hold one end of the fabric against your left shoulder while your assistant gathered the massive length of cloth. Then came the critical over-the-shoulder throw, which had to be executed with perfect tension. Too loose and you'd look sloppy, too tight and you couldn't move your arms. The final drape across the body required mathematical precision to achieve that effortlessly elegant look that screamed, "I'm important enough to wear 6 yards of wool in public." But here's the kicker. Once you were dressed, you couldn't really do anything physical. No running, no heavy lifting, no sudden movements. Wealthy Romans essentially became living statues for the duration of their public appearances. They developed an entire walking style, slow, measured, dignified, partly out of necessity. One enthusiastic gesture could undo an hour of careful draping. The quality of your toga fabric also broadcast your exact social status to anyone with eyes. Senators wore togas with broad purple stripes that cost more than most people's annual income. The purple dye came from thousands of tiny murex shells, each producing just a few drops of precious color. Knights wore narrower purple stripes. Regular citizens made do with plain white wool, but even plain required bleaching processes that were expensive and time-consuming. And the maintenance? Forget about it. Togas couldn't be washed in the normal sense. The fabric was too delicate and the draping too complex. Instead, they were cleaned by professional fullers who used a combination of human urine for the ammonia, fuller's earth clay, and sulfur fumes. The whole process took days and cost a fortune. Most Romans owned only one or two togas and wore them until they literally fell apart. The culinary reality, pulse, and privilege. As you fumble with the fabric, you can hear the city coming alive outside, the cry of a baker announcing fresh bread, the rumble of wooden wheels on stone as a cart loaded with amphorae. Those pointed clay jars used for storing everything from wine to olive oil makes its way through the narrow streets. The distant sound of hammering from a blacksmith's shop. Rome never truly sleeps, but the rhythm of morning is unmistakable. You're starting to feel hungry, and that brings us back to that surprising fact from the beginning. Romans ate well if you had money. The wealthy consumed elaborate meals with multiple courses, exotic spices, and delicacies imported from across the empire. Flamingo tongues, peacock brains, dormice stuffed with honey and nuts. But the majority of Romans, the common people living in crowded apartment buildings, survived on a very different diet. Their main food was that pulse I mentioned, a porridge made from grains, legumes, and whatever vegetables they could afford. It sounds bland, and it usually was. But this simple mixture provided most of the calories and nutrition that kept the empire running. Mixed with olive oil, perhaps flavored with a bit of garum, a fermented fish sauce that Romans put on everything, pulse was filling, cheap, and could feed a family for days. But let's dive deeper into this culinary nightmare that sustained an empire. Pulse wasn't just one recipe. It was a catch-all term for whatever grain-based mush you could cobble together from available ingredients. On a good day, it might include wheat, barley, lentils, and chickpeas, creating something that was at least nutritionally complete. On a bad day? Well, Romans got creative with their starvation. They'd throw in anything remotely edible, stale breadcrumbs, vegetable scraps that were one day away from rot, mysterious meat fragments of questionable origin, and whatever weeds they could forage from empty lots. The texture was always wrong, sometimes soupy and watery when fuel was scarce and couldn't be boiled long enough, other times thick as mortar when water was in short supply. The smell, dear God, the smell. Imagine wet cardboard mixed with old gym socks, with occasional notes of whatever was decomposing in the pot. Romans would try to mask this aromatic disaster with strong seasonings, but spices were expensive. Most families relied on that ubiquitous garum-fermented fish guts that had been left to rot in the sun for months until they achieved the perfect combination of salty and putrid. And here's what really puts modern food complaints in perspective. This wasn't just poor people food. Middle-class Romans, the backbone of the empire, ate pulse for breakfast, lunch, and often dinner too. A clerk like Marcus might have pulse for breakfast, a handful of olives for lunch, and pulse again for dinner with maybe a small piece of bread if he'd had a good week. The cooking process was its own form of torture. Most apartments didn't have proper kitchens, just small braziers that filled tiny rooms with choking smoke. Families would take turns stirring the pot, coughing and crying from the fumes, while trying not to let the mixture burn and stick to the bottom. Burns from hot oil and boiling pulse were so common that most Romans bore permanent scars on their hands and forearms. But perhaps most depressing of all was the social ritual around pulse eating. Families would gather around their single pot, each member getting a portion based on their status within the household. The father ate first and got the most, followed by sons, then daughters, with the mother often eating last and least. Children learned early that complaining about the food meant going hungry, so they developed the Roman virtue of stoic acceptance, not through philosophical training, but through daily culinary suffering. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. The real adventure of Roman daily life is just beginning to unfold. As you finish adjusting your clothing and prepare to step outside, you have no idea what this day will bring. Will it be routine and peaceful? Will political upheaval shake the empire? Will barbarians breach the frontiers? Will plague arrive from the east? In ancient Rome, as in any time, the future was always uncertain. But that uncertainty was balanced by something that's harder to find in our modern world. A deep sense of connection to community, to tradition, to the rhythms of nature and human life that had sustained civilization for centuries. Romans understood their place in a larger story, and that understanding gave them a kind of peace that transcended individual circumstances. So let's step outside together, into the narrow streets of the greatest city the world has ever known, and discover what it really meant to live in ancient Rome. The door to your building is heavy wood, reinforced with iron bands that have turned green with age. As you pull it open, the hinges creak with a sound that echoes off the narrow walls of the alley. The air outside is cool and sharp, carrying the scent of wood smoke from a dozen different fires, the earthy smell of the Tiber River, and underneath it all, the unmistakable aroma of a city where 1 million people live, work, and breathe together. The alley is barely wide enough for 2 people to pass, its walls rising 3, 4, sometimes 5 stories above your head. These are the insulae, the apartment buildings that house the vast majority of Rome's population. They lean inward slightly, each floor jutting out a bit farther than the one below, until the buildings almost seem to embrace across the narrow space between them. Laundry hangs from windows and balconies, creating a patchwork of colors against the red-brown brick and painted plaster walls. As you emerge from the alley onto one of the main streets, the city opens up before you like a living theater. The street is paved with large polygonal stones, fitted together so precisely that a knife blade couldn't slip between them. These stones have been worn smooth by centuries of feet, hooves, and wheels, creating a surface that gleams wet in the early morning light. The buildings here are a mixture of styles and purposes. Ground floor shops with their wooden shutters just beginning to open for the day's business. The elegant facades of wealthy homes, their walls painted in deep reds and yellows, decorated with architectural details that speak of prosperity and good taste. Temple porticos where early worshippers are already gathering to make their morning offerings to the gods. But it's the people who really capture your attention. Even at this early hour, the streets are alive with activity. Slaves hurry past, carrying bundles and water jugs, their simple tunics marking their status as clearly as uniforms. Citizens walk with more dignity, their togas carefully arranged to display their social position. Merchants call out their wares from doorways and street corners, their voices adding to the growing symphony of urban life. The diversity is staggering. In the space of a single block, you might see a Germanic slave with fair hair and blue eyes, an Egyptian merchant with skin darkened by desert sun, a Greek scholar with the pale complexion of someone who spends his days with scrolls and styluses, Gallic trader whose reddish beard and checked cloak mark his Celtic origins. Rome has become a melting pot of the known world, where every culture and every race mingles in the pursuit of commerce, advancement, and survival. The smells change as you walk. Here, the aroma of fresh bread wafts from a bakery where the ovens have been burning all night. There, the sharp scent of vinegar and fermented fish announces a shop selling garum and other condiments. Further along, the metallic smell of heating iron tells you you're passing a blacksmith's workshop, where the rhythmic ring of hammer on anvil provides a steady beat underlying the urban symphony. You're heading toward the baths, those magnificent complexes that serve as the social and cultural centers of Roman life. But the journey itself is part of the experience, a window into the daily rhythms that have governed this city for centuries. Roman hygiene, a social experience. Now that you're walking through the morning streets, it's time to experience what Rome actually felt like to live in. But first, let's address something that might make you appreciate your modern bathroom. Romans had a very different relationship with privacy and hygiene than we do today. If you need to relieve yourself, you have a few options, none of them particularly private by today's standards. Wealthy Romans might have a private latrine in their homes, essentially a stone seat with a hole that connects to the city's sophisticated sewer system. But most people used public facilities, where you'd sit side by side with your neighbors on a long marble bench, socializing while you conducted your business. Picture this scene. A dozen men sitting in a row discussing politics, business deals, or the latest chariot races while attending to nature's call. They wiped with sponges attached to sticks, which were rinsed in running water and reused by the next person. This might seem shocking to our modern sensibilities, but it reflects something important about Roman culture. They were intensely social people. Privacy, as we understand it, barely existed. But here's where it gets really wild. These communal toilet sessions weren't just about biological necessity. They were networking opportunities. Important business deals were struck while sitting side by side on marble seats. Political alliances were formed over the gentle splash of running water below. Young men would seek mentorship from their elders, literally learning the ropes of Roman society while sharing a very intimate human experience. The business conducted in latrines was so important that some wealthy Romans would schedule their bathroom visits to coincide with specific people they wanted to influence. Imagine receiving an invitation that essentially said, "Meet me at the public toilet at the 3rd hour, I have a proposition for you." This wasn't crude humor, it was serious networking strategy. The logic was that people were more honest and vulnerable when literally exposed, making it easier to gauge their true intentions and character. The conversational etiquette was remarkably sophisticated for such a crude setting. There were unwritten rules about which topics were appropriate: business, politics, philosophy, and which were forbidden: personal gossip about people present, graphic descriptions of bodily functions, emotional outbursts. Romans developed the ability to conduct serious negotiations while maintaining the fiction that the physical reality of the situation wasn't happening. Some of Rome's most important political decisions were literally made in the toilet. The historian Suetonius records several instances where senators used latrine meetings to plan legislation, discuss military strategies, and even plot against emperors. The informal setting made such conversations seem casual and deniable, while the universal human vulnerability created a strange form of diplomatic immunity. The sponges themselves, called tersoriums, were a shared resource that would horrify any modern germaphobe. After use, they'd be dipped in a channel of flowing water, sometimes mixed with vinegar for disinfection, and left for the next person. Wealthy Romans might bring their own personal sponge, carried by a slave, but most people just grabbed whatever was available. Disease transmission was rampant, but Romans had no concept of bacteria or viruses. They just accepted frequent illness as part of life. The quality of sponges varied dramatically based on the facility's funding and maintenance. Premium latrines used soft sea sponges imported from Greek waters, while budget facilities made do with coarse river sponges or even bundles of cloth that became increasingly disgusting with use. Some entrepreneurial Romans made livings as sponge cleaners, maintaining and replacing the tersoriums for a fee, though this was considered one of the lowest possible occupations. The water systems were engineering marvels that revealed Roman priorities in stark detail. The same civilization that built massive aqueducts to bring fresh mountain water to the city also designed elaborate systems to carry human waste away from populated areas. The flowing water beneath the seats was carefully engineered to prevent backup and maintain sanitation, with gradients calculated to ensure proper drainage flow. But the system had its failures. During dry seasons, or when aqueducts required maintenance, water pressure would drop, leading to backup situations that were genuinely nightmarish. The smell alone could clear entire city blocks, and the health hazards were severe enough to cause temporary abandonment of affected areas. Romans learned to check water levels before using public facilities, and experienced city dwellers could predict system failures by monitoring fountain pressure throughout the day. The latrines were architectural marvels in their own right. The best ones featured marble seats carved to perfection, with intricate decorations and even small shrines to Fortuna, the goddess of luck, because apparently even Romans wanted divine protection during their most vulnerable moments. Some facilities could accommodate 50 people at once, turning bathroom breaks into major social events where half the city's business might be conducted. The maintenance staff for these facilities lived in a world that was simultaneously essential and invisible. Slaves who cleaned latrines were among the most despised in Roman society, yet their work was crucial for preventing disease outbreaks that could devastate the city. They developed specialized tools and techniques for waste removal, working in conditions that were barely survivable, often dying young from exposure to toxic gases and infectious diseases. What's truly mind-boggling is that Romans considered this system more civilized than private toilets. They viewed solitary bathroom use as barbaric, antisocial behavior. To them, Sharing this basic human experience strengthened community bonds and reinforced social hierarchies. The senator might sit next to the shopkeeper, but everyone knew their place in the conversation and in the social order that governed every aspect of Roman life. This communal approach to bodily functions reflects something important about Roman culture. They were intensely social people. Privacy, as we understand it, barely existed. Families often lived in single rooms. Meals were eaten in groups. Even bathing was a social activity that could last for hours. The public latrines themselves were marvels of engineering. Fresh water flowed continuously through channels beneath the seats, carrying waste away to the sewers that ran beneath the city. These sewers, including the famous Cloaca Maxima, were large enough for maintenance workers to walk through upright. They emptied into the Tiber River, carrying the city's waste downstream and away from the population centers. Navigating the streets and the insulae. Speaking of bathing, let's follow a typical Roman to the public baths, one of the most important social institutions of the empire. As you walk through the streets toward the nearest bathhouse, notice how different this city is from anything in the modern world. First, there's the smell. Not the romantic aroma of Hollywood's version of ancient Rome, but a complex mixture of cooking food, burning wood, human sweat, animal dung from the horses and donkeys used for transportation, and the ever-present scent of olive oil. Romans used olive oil for everything: cooking, lighting, and especially for cleaning their bodies, since soap, as we know it, didn't exist yet. The streets themselves are narrow and winding, barely wide enough for two people to pass comfortably. They're paved with large stone blocks, worn smooth by countless feet and hooves. Down the center runs a shallow channel for rainwater and other liquids. Romans had a habit of emptying their chamber pots directly out their windows, so walking close to buildings could be hazardous to both your health and your dignity. The buildings tower above you, some apartment blocks reaching 6 or 7 stories high. These insulae housed the majority of Rome's population. The higher up you lived, the cheaper the rent, but also the more dangerous. Fires were common, structural collapses not unheard of. The wealthy lived on the ground floors, with thick walls and courtyards. The poor climbed narrow staircases to tiny rooms under the eaves. Let me paint you the real picture of these death traps masquerading as housing. The insulae were essentially ancient skyscrapers built with the safety standards of a house of cards. The ground floors were solid stone fireproof, spacious, secure, but as you climbed higher, the construction got increasingly sketchy. Upper floors were built with timber frames, mud brick, and whatever cheap materials the slumlords could get away with. But the reality was even more horrifying than this suggests. These buildings were essentially vertical slums designed to extract maximum profit from minimum space, with no regard for human safety or dignity. The construction techniques would make modern building inspectors weep with rage. Upper floors were supported by wooden beams that were often green, unseasoned timber that would warp and crack within months. The walls were frequently just thin wooden partitions filled with rubble, debris, and sometimes literal garbage. The structural engineering was so poor that buildings would visibly sway in strong winds. Residents on upper floors learned to recognize the warning signs of impending collapse. Creaking sounds, new cracks in walls, doors that suddenly wouldn't close properly. Some buildings developed permanent tilts, leaning against neighboring structures for support in arrangements that guaranteed if one building fell, it would take several others with it. Fire was the constant terror that haunted every resident's dreams. The combination of open cooking fires, oil lamps, timber construction, and overcrowding created conditions that were essentially giant tinderboxes waiting for ignition. When fires started, and they started regularly, they spread with terrifying speed through the interconnected structures. Entire city blocks could be consumed in hours, with residents trapped on upper floors having no escape route except jumping to their deaths. The Roman fire brigade, the vigiles, were brave but hopelessly under-equipped for the scale of the problem. They had leather buckets, primitive pumps, and hooks for pulling down burning buildings to create fire breaks. But their main strategy was essentially controlled demolition, destroying adjacent buildings before the fire could spread. This meant that even if your building wasn't burning, it might be torn down to save the neighborhood, leaving you homeless with no compensation. A typical 6th-floor apartment was smaller than a modern walk-in closet. We're talking about spaces so cramped that a family of 4 would sleep, eat, and live in an area roughly 8 feet by 10 feet. There was no kitchen. Cooking meant hauling a portable brazier up 6 flights of stairs, hoping it wouldn't tip over and incinerate the building. No bathroom. You'd either use a chamber pot, which you'd have to carry downstairs to empty, or make the treacherous nighttime journey to the public latrines. The furniture situation was equally grim. Most families owned almost nothing. A few sleeping mats, a cooking pot, maybe a wooden chest for storing their meager possessions. Space was so precious that furniture had to serve multiple functions. A storage chest doubled as a table and seating. Sleeping areas were used for cooking during the day. Children learned to live in spaces that would challenge modern contortionists. The staircases themselves were death traps that claimed lives daily. Narrow, steep, and poorly lit, they were built as cheaply as possible with no safety features. In winter, they became ice rinks when water from the fountains froze overnight. In summer, they turned into sweltering chimneys that could literally cook you alive before you reached your room. The steps were often uneven, the railings non-existent, and the lighting so poor that people regularly fell to their deaths, especially after dark. Water was another nightmare that reveals the true horror of Roman urban planning. Remember that long trek to the public fountain? Try doing that 6 times a day while carrying heavy ceramic jugs upstairs so narrow you had to turn sideways. Most people simply went without adequate water, living in a constant state of mild dehydration and poor hygiene. Families would ration water like gold, using the same basin for drinking, cooking, and washing until it became too dirty to use. The logistics of daily life were overwhelming. Everything had to be carried up those treacherous stairs. Water, food, fuel for cooking, waste to be disposed of. Shopping required multiple trips because you could only carry so much at once. Elderly residents often became prisoners in their own homes, unable to manage the physical demands of urban vertical living. Pregnant women faced impossible choices between risking dangerous stairs or going without necessities. The rent collection was equally brutal, revealing the systematic exploitation that kept these buildings profitable despite their obvious dangers. Landlords employed enforcers who weren't shy about using violence against tenants who couldn't pay. Miss a payment, and you'd find your possessions literally thrown into the street, assuming the building hadn't collapsed or burned down first, taking everything you owned with it. Eviction was swift and merciless, with no legal protections for tenants and no concern for where displaced families would go. But perhaps most psychologically damaging was the complete lack of stability these buildings represented. Residents lived with the daily knowledge that they could lose everything, their homes, their possessions, their lives, through circumstances completely beyond their control. This created a mentality of desperate short-term thinking, where planning for the future seemed pointless when survival through the next week was uncertain. The Roman baths, a social nexus. As you make your way through the crowds, you're surrounded by a symphony of languages. Yes, Latin is common, but you also hear Greek, Germanic dialects, Egyptian, Celtic, Aramaic, and dozens of other tongues from across the empire. Rome is truly cosmopolitan, a melting pot of cultures that makes modern cities look homogeneous by comparison. Finally, you reach the baths. Let's say it's the Baths of Caracalla, one of the grandest complexes in the city. As you approach, the building looms above you like a cathedral. The entrance hall is vast, with soaring ceilings supported by massive columns. The floor is covered in intricate mosaics depicting sea gods and marine life. The walls are lined with colored marble imported from every corner of the empire. You pay your entrance fee, just a few small bronze coins, because the emperor subsidized the baths to keep the population happy. This is part of the famous bread and circuses policy. Keep people fed and entertained, and they won't revolt. Inside, the baths are a marvel of engineering that wouldn't be matched in Europe for over 1,000 years. The floors and walls are heated by a hypocaust system. Hot air from furnaces circulates through hollow spaces beneath the floors and inside the walls. The system is so effective that even in winter, you can walk barefoot on marble floors that feel pleasantly warm. But the baths aren't just about getting clean. They're a social club, a gymnasium, a library, and a place of business all rolled into one. In the large central hall, men are wrestling and exercising. Merchants are conducting deals. Politicians are giving informal speeches. Philosophers are debating while their students take notes. Children are playing games while their parents socialize. But let me paint you the full picture of just how central the baths were to Roman civilization. They were essentially the internet, shopping mall, gym, spa, library, and coffee shop of the ancient world, all combined into one steamy, marble-clad complex that operated from dawn to dusk. The social hierarchies at the baths were as complex as anywhere in Roman society, but they operated by different rules. Yes, there were separate hours for men and women, usually women in the morning, men in the afternoon, and slaves couldn't use the same facilities as citizens. But within those constraints, the baths were surprisingly democratic spaces where a wealthy merchant might find himself scraping oil off a poor citizen's back, or where a senator's son might learn philosophy from a freedman scholar. The business networking was legendary. Romans called it negotiating in the nude, and it was where the real decisions got made. Why? Because when everyone's naked and vulnerable, the usual posturing and power plays become ridiculous. A toga might hide your social status, but there's no hiding a beer belly or scrawny arms. Some of Rome's most important trade deals, military alliances, and even marriages were arranged between the Caldarium and the Frigidarium. The exercise culture was hardcore in ways that would intimidate modern gym-goers. Romans didn't exercise for health or appearance. They exercised for war. Every free male citizen was potentially a soldier, and the baths palaestrae were designed to keep the population combat-ready. Wrestling matches could turn deadly serious, with broken bones and blood being perfectly acceptable outcomes. Boxing was bare-knuckle and brutal, often leaving participants permanently disfigured. But the most fascinating aspect was the bathing ritual itself, which was as complex and meaningful as a religious ceremony. The order was sacred. First, the apoditerium, undressing room, then exercise, then the gradual progression through temperature zones. Skipping steps or doing them out of order was considered not just rude, but potentially dangerous to your health and spiritual well-being. The strigil process deserves special mention because it was simultaneously intimate and public in ways that would horrify modern people. Friends, slaves, or hired attendants would scrape every inch of your body with these curved metal tools, removing not just oil and dirt, but dead skin, creating piles of human debris that slaves constantly swept away. The scraping was often painful. Imagine being scratched all over with a butter knife. But Romans believed it was essential for health. The conversations during scraping sessions were legendary. This was when Romans gossiped, plotted, philosophized, and conducted therapy sessions. Imagine discussing your deepest fears or wildest ambitions while someone systematically scrapes the skin off your back. It created a strange intimacy that broke down social barriers and led to friendships that might never have formed otherwise. But the strigil conversations reveal something profound about Roman psychology and social dynamics that goes far beyond simple grooming rituals. The vulnerability of being naked and scraped created a psychological state that Romans learned to exploit for everything from business negotiations to political plotting. When someone is literally removing your dead skin with a metal tool, normal social defenses become absurd, leading to levels of honesty and openness that were impossible in formal settings. The process itself was intensely intimate in ways that would shock modern sensibilities. The person wielding the strigil had to know your body completely, every scar, every blemish, every sensitive area. They learned to read your muscle tension, your breathing patterns, your physical responses to stress or pleasure. This created relationships that were simultaneously professional and deeply personal, often lasting for decades and involving levels of trust that exceeded many marriages. Professional strigil operators developed skills that went far beyond simple skin scraping. They learned to read their clients' moods, health problems, and emotional states through touch. An experienced operator could diagnose illness, identify stress patterns, and even predict behavioral changes based on subtle changes in skin condition, muscle tone, and physical responses. They became unofficial therapists, confidants, and medical advisors rolled into one. The equipment itself was surprisingly sophisticated, with strigils crafted from different metals for different purposes. Bronze strigils were standard for everyday use, but wealthy Romans owned silver or even gold strigils for special occasions. The curve and edge of each tool was carefully calibrated to remove dead skin without causing injury, and master craftsmen could create strigils that were works of art as well as functional tools. The oils used during the process were as complex as the social rituals themselves. Different oils were believed to have different properties. Olive oil for everyday cleaning, almond oil for sensitive skin, exotic oils from distant provinces for special occasions. Wealthy Romans would have custom oil blends created specifically for their skin type and personal preferences, with recipes that were closely guarded family secrets. The social hierarchies during strigil sessions were fluid in ways that would have been impossible elsewhere in Roman society. A slave might scrape his master's back while discussing philosophy, creating temporary equality that existed nowhere else in their relationship. Veterans might teach younger men about life while cleaning their skin, passing down wisdom along with dead cells. Politicians might form alliances while being scraped by the same attendant, creating bonds that transcended normal political divisions. But the process also revealed the harsh realities of Roman life in intimate detail. Scars from military service, industrial accidents, and violent crimes were impossible to hide. Signs of disease, malnutrition, and aging were displayed for all to see. The strigil sessions became informal medical examinations where health problems were diagnosed, discussed, and sometimes treated through the accumulated wisdom of the Bath community. The psychological effects of regular strigil sessions shaped Roman character in ways that influenced the entire culture. The acceptance of physical vulnerability, the comfort with intimate contact between men, and the ability to maintain dignity while being literally scraped raw, all contributed to Roman concepts of masculinity and friendship that were unique in the ancient world. The conversations that occurred during these sessions influenced everything from military strategy to artistic movements. Generals planned campaigns while being scraped. Philosophers developed theories during oil removal, and poets found inspiration in the rhythmic scraping sounds. The baths became informal think tanks where some of Rome's most important cultural and political developments were literally scraped into existence. Perhaps most remarkably, the strigil sessions created a form of democracy of vulnerability that existed nowhere else in Roman society. When everyone is naked and being scraped, traditional markers of status become irrelevant. A senator's body was just as vulnerable as a merchant's, and wisdom could flow in any direction. These sessions became one of the few places in Roman society where true meritocracy could temporarily emerge, with respect earned through the quality of conversation rather than the quality of one's toga. The bathing ritual and Roman daily food. The bathing process itself follows a strict routine. First, you undress in the changing rooms, where attendants watch your clothes. Then you might exercise in the palestra, working up a sweat. Next comes the actual bathing sequence. You start in the tepidarium, a warm room where your body adjusts to the heat. Here, slaves or friends scrape your skin with curved metal tools called strigils, removing olive oil and dirt. 1. Then it's into the caldarium, the hot room, where you sweat profusely. Finally, you plunge into the frigidarium, a pool of cold water that shocks your system and closes your pores. 2. Throughout this process, you're never alone. The baths are filled with conversation, laughter, and the splash of water. Business deals are made, marriages arranged, political alliances formed. A Roman who didn't visit the baths regularly would be cut off from the social networks that made life in the city possible. After bathing, you might visit the attached library, get a massage with scented oils, have your hair cut, or simply lounge in the gardens, enjoying the shade and the sound of fountains. But eventually, hunger calls you back to the streets. It's now mid-morning, and your stomach is reminding you that you've had nothing but a cup of watered wine since waking. Most Romans eat only one real meal per day, the cena, taken in the late afternoon. Breakfast, if you have it at all, is just bread dipped in wine or water. Lunch is a light snack. All the day's social and nutritional needs are concentrated into that single evening meal. But first, you need to buy ingredients, which means visiting the markets. Roman commerce is unlike anything in the modern world, intensely personal, highly specialized, and completely without standardization. The city is divided into neighborhoods based on trades. All the shoemakers cluster on one street, all the metalworkers on another. This makes shopping efficient if you know where to go, but it also means that craftsmen are in constant competition with their immediate neighbors. As you walk through the markets, vendors call out their wares in sing-song voices. Fresh bread, baked this morning, garum from Spain, silk from distant China. The sounds blend into a constant hum of commerce that never stops during daylight hours. The array of goods is staggering. Rome's position at the center of the empire means that products from Britain to India flow through its markets. You can buy amber from the Baltic, ivory from Africa, spices from India, silk from China, gold from Spain. The city consumes the wealth of the known world. But for ordinary Romans, shopping means visiting the local tabernae small shops that open directly onto the street. The shopkeeper lives above his shop with his family. He knows his customers personally, extends credit to regular clients, and often specializes in goods from his native region. Purchasing anything requires negotiation. Prices aren't fixed. They depend on your relationship with the merchant, the time of day, the season, your skill at bargaining. A savvy Roman can buy the same item for half the price that a naive customer would pay. A day in the life of a Roman clerk. Let's follow Marcus through his daily routine. Marcus is a mid-level clerk who works in the imperial bureaucracy. His story will help us understand how most Romans actually lived, not the emperors and gladiators of popular imagination, but the accountants and shopkeepers who kept the empire running. Marcus lives with his wife Livia and their 2 young children in a modest apartment on the 2nd floor of an insula. His home consists of 3 rooms, a main living area, a small bedroom, and an even smaller room where the children sleep. There's no bathroom. They use public facilities. The walls are thin, and they can hear their neighbors constantly. Privacy is a luxury that simply doesn't exist for most Romans. But Marcus is fortunate in many ways. His job provides steady income and social respectability. He can read and write skills that perhaps only 10% of the population possess. His daily routine starts before dawn. He makes his way to the public fountain, carrying ceramic jugs. The water is free, but collecting it requires time and effort. Back home, Livia has started the fire in their small brazier. Breakfast is simple: bread dunked in watered wine, perhaps with a few olives. After this modest meal, Marcus makes his way to his workplace near the forum. The streets are busy with early risers, slaves carrying supplies, shopkeepers opening their premises, farmers bringing produce from the countryside. His work involves copying documents, calculating taxes, and maintaining records. It's meticulous work that requires skill and education. He writes with a reed pen on papyrus for important documents, wax tablets for temporary notes. During the day, Marcus interacts with people from across the empire: a tax collector from Britain, a merchant from Egypt, a soldier from Germany. Through paperwork, he touches every corner of the known world. Around midday, he takes a break for a light meal. He might visit a thermopolium, an ancient fast food restaurant where hot food is served from ceramic jars. These are social centers for working-class Romans, where men gather to exchange news and gossip. After lunch, Marcus returns to work until late afternoon. As evening approaches, he begins the most important part of the Roman day, preparing for the cena, the main meal. He stops at the markets on his way home, choosing ingredients carefully. Tonight, Livia plans to prepare a stew of lentils and barley, flavored with herbs and a small amount of garum. There will be fresh bread and perhaps some fruit. The cooking process is time-consuming and labor-intensive. Everything must be prepared by hand, cooked over an open fire, seasoned carefully. Livia has learned to make delicious meals from basic ingredients, a skill passed down through generations. As the family gathers for their evening meal, they recline on simple couches around a low table. Romans eat lying down, using their fingers and pieces of bread to scoop up food. The meal is accompanied by conversation about the day's events. After eating, as darkness settles over the city, the family's activities wind down. They might visit neighbors, play simple games, or listen as Marcus reads from a scroll. Education and entertainment blend together in ways that seem alien to our modern world. For most Romans, evening is a time for rest and community. The city grows quieter as people retreat to their homes, but it doesn't grow silent. Oil lamps flicker in windows, casting warm light onto the streets below. Night watchmen begin their patrols. The urban rhythm shifts from commerce to domestic life. As you follow this ordinary Roman family, something remarkable becomes clear. Despite vast differences in technology, their fundamental experiences are deeply human and recognizable. They worry about money, cherish their children, take pride in their work, enjoy good food and company. Roman slavery, a life of contradictions. The wealthy, of course, live very differently. In their grand houses with private baths, elaborate gardens, and dozens of slaves, Every comfort is available. Let's step inside one of these magnificent homes to understand the full spectrum of Roman society. The villa of Senator Gaius Aurelius sits on the Palatine Hill, Rome's most prestigious neighborhood. As you approach through elaborate gardens, you're surrounded by perfectly manicured landscapes. Fountains splash into marble basins. Peacocks strut across precisely trimmed lawns. Statues stand in alcoves carved from shaped hedges. The house itself is a marvel of architecture. The atrium soars 3 stories high, supported by columns of colored marble. The walls are decorated with frescoes depicting Greek mythology. The floor is a masterpiece of mosaic work. What strikes you most is the silence. Unlike apartment buildings with their thin walls and constant noise, this house has thick stone walls that muffle sound completely. Privacy, unknown to ordinary Romans, is available here in abundance. The senator's daily routine follows aristocratic tradition. He begins with the salutatio, where clients come to pay respects and ask favors. The relationship between patron and client is the backbone of Roman society. The senator provides protection and support. Clients offer loyalty and service. After morning business, the senator might attend Senate meetings, where the serious work of governing takes place. These sessions involve elaborate speeches and complex negotiations that determine the fate of provinces and peoples. The senator's wife manages their household with corporate efficiency. She oversees dozens of slaves, each with specialized duties. Roman slavery is complex and varied. Some slaves live better than free citizens, enjoying steady meals, decent clothing, and the possibility of freedom. The senator's personal slave, a Greek named Antonios, serves as secretary and confidant. He manages the senator's schedule, handles correspondence, and provides advice. Other slaves have different experiences. Kitchen slaves work under brutal conditions. Field slaves face even harsher treatment. But let's examine the bewildering complexity of Roman slavery, because it defies every modern assumption about what it means to be enslaved. Antonios, despite being legally property, lives better than 90% of free Romans. His quarters in the senator's villa are spacious, well-heated, and decorated with artwork. He eats the same food as the family, wears fine clothing, and has access to the senator's private library. He speaks 4 languages fluently, manages financial transactions worth millions of sestertii, and his advice influences imperial policy. Yet he could be sold tomorrow like a piece of furniture, whipped for minor infractions or killed with no legal consequences. This paradox created a psychological complexity that we can barely comprehend. Antonios must maintain perfect loyalty and gratitude, while knowing that his comfortable life depends entirely on his master's whims. He's simultaneously trusted with state secrets and denied the most basic human right of self-determination. The emotional dynamics were even more twisted. Antonios has genuine affection for the senator's children. He's tutored them since birth, nursed them through illnesses, and celebrated their achievements. They, in turn, see him as a beloved family member. But he also knows that these same children will inherit him as property, and that his feelings of love are legally meaningless. He might spend decades building relationships that could be severed instantly by a financial crisis or family dispute. Educational slaves like Antonios occupied a strange middle ground in Roman society. They were invited to dinner parties with free citizens, consulted on important decisions, and treated with public respect. But they couldn't leave, couldn't refuse orders, and couldn't protect themselves from sexual exploitation. Many developed elaborate psychological defense mechanisms, emotional distance, philosophical detachment, or complete identification with their master's interests as a form of survival. The contrast with field slaves was stark and deliberate. On the senator's country estates, hundreds of agricultural slaves lived in conditions that were barely human. They slept in windowless barracks, worked from dawn to dusk in all weather, and received just enough food to maintain their labor capacity. These slaves were seen as talking tools, valuable for their productivity, but replaceable when they wore out. The middle-tier household slaves experienced the most psychological complexity. A cook might be trusted with expensive ingredients and feeding the family, but beaten for oversalting a dish. A personal attendant might know intimate family secrets, but be forbidden from speaking to other slaves about what they heard. A nursemaid might raise children from birth, only to watch them grow up and treat her as invisible furniture. Perhaps most heartbreaking were the slave families. Marriage between slaves had no legal status, and families could be separated at any time. Parents would teach their children to be emotionally prepared for sale while still trying to provide love and stability. Slave children often didn't know if their parents were alive or dead, sold to distant estates where communication was impossible. The manumission system, the process of freeing slaves, added another layer of complexity. Freedom wasn't guaranteed by good service or loyalty. It was granted at the master's discretion and often for selfish reasons. A dying master might free slaves in his will to demonstrate generosity, while a living master might free valuable slaves to gain their continued service as grateful freedmen. The promise of eventual freedom kept slaves compliant, but the uncertainty kept them vulnerable. Yet relationships develop that transcend legal categories. The senator's children grow up with slave playmates. The family's nurse is treated with affection approaching family membership. When slaves earn freedom, they often remain connected as clients. The evening meal in the senator's house is elaborate theater. Guests recline on elegant couches around artistic tables. Food arrives in orchestrated courses designed to impress. Conversation ranges across politics, philosophy, literature, and gossip. But even among the wealthy, fundamental rhythms assert themselves. As oil lamps burn lower, elaborate personas give way to private concerns. The senator worries about investments and rivals. His wife thinks about household management and family relationships. The gladiators represent another unique category within slavery. These trained athletes fight for entertainment, becoming celebrities beloved by crowds. They live in special schools, eating high-protein diets, and receiving excellent medical care. Yet they remain property, forced to risk their lives for others' amusement. As night falls across all levels of society, the city begins its transition to peaceful rest. In the senator's villa, slaves extinguish lamps one by one. The dinner party winds down as guests depart in litters carried by slaves. But let's return to Marcus and his family, whose experiences represent the vast majority of Romans. As evening concludes and darkness settles, they begin simple rituals that prepare them for sleep. Roman religion, a daily negotiation. Roman life wasn't just about material concerns, food, shelter, work, and family relationships. Like all human societies, Rome was sustained by beliefs and practices that gave meaning to everyday existence, connecting individuals to larger purposes and cosmic order. Roman religion was unlike modern faiths. It wasn't based on personal belief or individual salvation, but on maintaining proper relationships between human and divine worlds. The gods weren't distant figures of worship, but active participants in daily life who required constant attention, negotiation, and respect. Every Roman home contained a lararium, a small shrine dedicated to household gods who protected the family. These weren't grand temples, but simple niches holding images of protective spirits. The lairs protected the household itself. The penates watched over food supply. The genius embodied the family patriarch's life force. Each morning, the household head made small offerings to these spirits: bread, wine, incense. These rituals took only minutes, but acknowledged the family's dependence on divine protection and their responsibility to maintain harmony between earth and heaven. These aren't elaborate religious ceremonies requiring priests or special knowledge. They're simple acknowledgments of spiritual forces that Romans believe surround and influence daily life. Every household has protective gods, every neighborhood guardian spirits, every profession patron deities. Religion isn't separate from ordinary life. It's woven into every activity, decision, hope, and fear. But Roman religion was far more pervasive and anxiety-inducing than these simple morning rituals suggest. Romans lived in constant fear of offending the gods through accidental violations of religious law. They believed that every action, from the direction you walked to the words you spoke, could either please or anger divine forces. This wasn't superstition. It was a comprehensive worldview that required constant vigilance and ritual maintenance. The sheer number of gods was overwhelming. Beyond the major Olympian deities, Romans worshipped hundreds of minor gods who controlled specific aspects of daily life. There was Cardea, goddess of door hinges, who had to be honored every time you entered or left your home. Terminus governed property boundaries. Ignore him, and your land deals would fail catastrophically. Robigus protected wheat crops from rust disease, but only if you offered him the sacrifice of a red dog at exactly the right time of year. professional religious obligations were even more complex. Bakers had to honor Fornax, goddess of ovens, with specific rituals or risk their bread burning. Merchants needed the favor of Mercury for successful trade, but also had to appease Terminus when conducting business across territorial boundaries. Soldiers carried amulets to dozens of different war gods, each protecting against specific types of death or injury. The religious calendar was a maze of festivals, observances, and taboo days when certain activities were forbidden. Romans needed to know that you couldn't conduct business on nones, couldn't get married during Lemuria when hostile ghosts were active, and couldn't start construction projects during certain moon phases. Violating these rules didn't just risk personal misfortune, it could bring divine wrath down on your entire family or community. Divination was equally complex and expensive. Romans consulted augurs, who read bird flight patterns, haruspices, who examined animal entrails, and various oracle systems before making important decisions. A merchant might spend a fortune on multiple divination sessions before launching a trading expedition, trying to determine not just whether the venture would succeed, but which gods needed appeasing along the way. The psychological pressure was enormous. Every setback, illness, financial loss, relationship problems was potentially evidence of religious negligence. Romans would retrace their recent actions, trying to identify which god they had inadvertently offended and what sacrifices were needed to restore divine favor. This created a perpetual state of spiritual anxiety that influenced every aspect of daily life. Personal religious practice varied enormously based on social class and individual temperament. Wealthy Romans could afford elaborate home shrines, expensive sacrifices, and private priests who handled the complex ritual requirements. Poor Romans made do with simple offerings and hoped their sincere intentions would compensate for their inability to afford proper ceremonies. Women's religious roles were particularly complex, involving goddess cults that promised everything from fertility to protection from domestic violence. The cult of Bonadea was exclusively female and involved secret rituals that men were forbidden to witness on pain of death. These religious gatherings provided one of the few spaces where Roman women could exercise agency and form networks independent of male control. The mystery religions offered even more dramatic spiritual experiences, involving initiation ceremonies that supposedly revealed cosmic secrets and guaranteed salvation in the afterlife. The cult of Mithras required initiates to be buried alive, undergo ritual combat, and endure various ordeals that tested their spiritual worthiness. Isis worship involved elaborate purification rituals and promises of resurrection that attracted followers seeking more personal religious experiences than traditional Roman religion provided. Public religion was even more elaborate, involving festivals and ceremonies marking the year's rhythm. The Roman calendar was crowded with religious observances, joyful celebrations of abundance, solemn rituals of purification seeking to restore proper relationships with offended deities. During Saturnalia, the December festival honoring agriculture's god, normal social order was temporarily reversed. Slaves dined with masters, wore their clothes, spoke freely without fear. It was carnival atmosphere providing psychological release from hierarchical society's tensions, while paradoxically reinforcing them by making reversal temporary. The Vestal Virgins, 6 priestesses tending the sacred flame in the Forum, embodied Rome's spiritual security. As long as their fire burned continuously and their chastity remained unbroken, the city would endure. These women, chosen as children from aristocratic families, served 30 years in roles giving them unprecedented independence in male-dominated society. Roman spirituality extended beyond formal religion into philosophy, which educated Romans regarded as practical guides to living well. Stoicism, the most popular school, taught that happiness came from accepting what you couldn't control while focusing energy on what you could influence, your own thoughts, choices, and responses. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." This attitude helped Romans endure inevitable uncertainties and hardships, disease, war, political upheaval, economic instability, natural disasters. Other philosophical schools offered different approaches. Epicureans taught that pleasure was the highest good, but defined pleasure as absence of pain and anxiety rather than sensual gratification. They advocated simple living, close friendships, and political withdrawal as paths to contentment. Mystery religions from eastern provinces offered more personal spiritual experiences. Mithras worship, popular among soldiers, promised salvation through secret knowledge. Isis worship attracted followers with elaborate rituals and promises of personal protection. Christianity, still a small persecuted sect during our imagined day, offered something radically different: eternal life through faith in Jesus Christ, and moral codes emphasizing love, forgiveness, and care for outcasts. These ideas challenged fundamental Roman assumptions about social status and powerful obligations. Nightfall and Roman rhythms. As our Roman family settles into sleep, they carry comfort of knowing their place in earthly and cosmic order. They have fulfilled duties to family, community, and gods. They have worked honestly, treated others respectfully, maintained traditions connecting them to ancestors and descendants. Livia tends the fire one last time, banking coals for warmth through the night. The children are already drowsy, tired from their day of play and learning. Roman children don't have structured modern schedules. They learn through observation and participation in adult activities. Marcus might read aloud from a scroll, his voice carrying Latin poetry's rhythms through their apartment like a lullaby. Education in Rome is primarily oral. Even literate people prefer hearing texts read aloud. The sound of voices reciting poetry, history, or philosophy creates shared cultural experiences binding communities across generations. Tonight, perhaps he reads from Virgil's Aeneid, the great epic telling Rome's mythical founding story. The familiar lines wash over the family. Arms and the man I sing, who first from Troy came exiled to Italy and Lavinian shores. The children know these stories by heart but never tire of hearing them. These aren't just entertainment. They're foundation myths, explaining who Romans are and why their empire exists, connecting individual families to grand Roman destiny narrative. As reading concludes and the family prepares for sleep, they follow rituals connecting them to ancestors and gods watching over human affairs. Livia places small offerings before the household shrine. Marcus pours wine drops onto the floor as libations to earth spirits, ensuring the building's stability. The children say prayers asking gods to protect their family, city, and emperor through night's dangerous hours. They pray for health, prosperity, peace, safety from fires and collapses threatening apartment dwellers. These prayers reflect Roman values: loyalty to family and state, respect for divine authority, hope for the future. As oil lamps burn low and the family settles into beds, you can hear sounds that lull Romans to sleep across the empire. Distant conversation murmurs from neighboring apartments, baby cries, night watch footsteps, fountain water splashing that never stops flowing. The air grows cooler as night deepens and families pull woolen blankets closer. Winter nights in Rome can be surprisingly cold, and without central heating, people rely on shared body warmth and heavy coverings. But there's something cozy about this forced intimacy, this shared dependence on simple comforts. Time and the seasons in ancient Rome. Time moved differently in ancient Rome than in our modern world of atomic clocks and digital precision. Without mechanical timepieces or standardized schedules, Romans lived according to natural rhythms, connecting them intimately to seasonal turning, moon phases, and the sun's daily journey across the sky. The Roman day was divided into 12 daylight hours and 12 darkness hours, but these hours' length changed dramatically with seasons. Summer hours were much longer than winter hours, stretching and contracting like breathing as Earth tilted toward and away from the sun. This flexible time relationship created more organic life rhythms flowing with natural cycles rather than fighting them. This temporal flexibility had profound effects on daily life and social organization. Work began at sunrise and ended at sunset, regardless of season or specific tasks needing completion. People rose with dawn and slept with darkness, their bodies naturally synchronized with cycles that had governed human life for millennia. The changing seasons brought different foods, activities, and moods to the city, reflecting agricultural cycles sustaining civilization. Spring arrived with first ships from Egypt, carrying the year's grain harvest, with fresh vegetables appearing in markets after months of preserved foods, with festivals celebrating renewal lifting spirits after winter's darkness. Summer brought the social season's height, when wealthy Romans left the hot, crowded city for country villas where breezes and gardens provided urban heat relief. But for most people, summer meant long work days under burning sun, seeking shade during hottest hours, enjoying extended daylight, allowing evening socializing in cooler air. Autumn was harvest time, when the year's agricultural work came to fruition in celebrations connecting urban dwellers to rural cycles. The grape harvest brought wine-making season with festivals honoring Bacchus, wine and fertility's god. The olive harvest provided oil that would light lamps and flavor food through coming winter months. Winter shortened days and drove people indoors, creating more intimate social atmosphere, strengthening family bonds. Families gathered around fires, telling stories and preserving traditions connecting them to ancestors. It was the season for reflection, planning, patient craft work requiring careful detail attention. Each season had its own personality, gifts, and challenges. Place in the eternal cycle Romans understood as both natural law and divine will. They didn't try controlling or escaping these rhythms through technology, but lived within them, finding in their regularity comfort and meaning sources transcending individual circumstances. The Roman calendar itself reflected this integration of natural and human time, with months named for gods, emperors, and agricultural activities connecting cosmic order to daily life. The year began in March, with spring renewal awakening Earth from winter's sleep and marking the traditional military campaign season start. Romans also understood time on grander scales, seeing their own era as part of vast historical cycles connecting past, present, and future. They believed they were living in unprecedented prosperity and peace, the Pax Romana bringing stability to the known world after centuries of warfare and chaos. But they also knew all empires rose and fell, that their own civilization would someday pass away, like those before it. This impermanence awareness paradoxically gave them deeper present-moment appreciation and simple pleasures filling daily life. If the empire itself was temporary, how much more precious were fleeting joys making existence worthwhile? Shared meals, children's laughter, sunlight warmth on stone, water sounds flowing through carefully engineered channels. Rome's night. The empire never sleeps gradually. As the city settles into sleep, the great urban machine that is Rome slows but never stops completely. Bakers are already starting their midnight work, kneading dough for tomorrow's bread in ovens that burn continuously. Night soil collectors move through the streets with carts and shovels, removing waste from public latrines and maintaining the sanitation systems that keep disease at bay. Guards patrol the aqueducts, ensuring that the city's water supply remains pure and abundant, protecting the engineering marvels that make urban life possible. Even in sleep, Romans remained connected to the vast imperial system that sustains their civilization and makes their individual lives possible. The grain that will become tomorrow's bread was grown in Egyptian fields, harvested by farmers whose lives are governed by the Nile's annual floods. The olive, the wine, the empire's wealth and diversity create opportunities and luxuries unimaginable in smaller, more isolated societies. But they also create dependencies that leave the system vulnerable to disruption from events thousands of miles away. When grain ships from Egypt are delayed by storms, Rome goes hungry. When barbarian tribes threaten the frontiers, the entire empire feels the economic and social strain of mobilizing resources for defense. As our imagined Roman night deepens and the city settles into complete tranquility, these larger rhythms assert themselves with gentle insistence. The same stars that watched over Rome's foundation continue their eternal dance overhead, indifferent to human ambition, but somehow benevolent in their constancy. The same moon that illuminated Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon now shines on sleeping households throughout the empire, connecting present moment to historical memory. In the morning, the sun will rise again over the 7 hills, bringing new challenges and opportunities to 1 million people. The bakers will produce fresh bread. The markets will fill with goods from across the known world. The baths will welcome citizens seeking cleanliness and community. The great wheel of Roman life will turn another day, carrying forward the hopes and dreams of ordinary people who find meaning in the simple act of living well. But for now, there is only rest, only the peaceful darkness that allows the body to repair itself and the mind to process the day's experiences into memory and wisdom. Our Roman family sleeps deeply, surrounded by the quiet sounds of their neighbors doing the same, breathing, dreaming, trusting in the dawn's return with the faith that has sustained human civilization since its beginning. As the Roman day draws to its close and oil lamps flicker low in windows across the 7 hills, let's walk together through the quieting streets of the eternal city. The bustle of commerce has faded like echoes in marble halls. The last vendors have packed their goods with practiced efficiency, and Rome settles into the gentle rhythm that has marked the end of countless days for nearly 1,000 years. Take a slow, deep breath and let yourself drift alongside the Tiber River, where the water moves softly through the city like liquid time itself, carrying the reflections of stars that have watched over this place for centuries beyond counting. The same constellations that guided Roman ships across the Mediterranean still wheel overhead with mathematical precision, patient and eternal, indifferent to human ambition but somehow benevolent in their constancy. In the apartment where Marcus and his family have finished their simple meal and completed their evening rituals, Livia tends to the small fire in their brazier one last time. She banks the coals carefully, covering them with ash so they'll hold warmth through the cool hours before dawn without consuming expensive fuel. The red glow fades to a whisper of heat, just enough to take the chill from the air without wasting the resources that must last until morning. The children have already fallen asleep on their simple beds, curled under woolen blankets that scratch softly against their skin, but provide warmth and comfort. Their breathing is deep and even, the unconscious trust of the young that tomorrow will bring new games, new discoveries, new small adventures in the narrow streets they know as well as their own names. Marcus extinguishes the oil lamp with a gentle puff of breath, and darkness settles over their home like a familiar friend returning after a day's absence. Outside, stone walls worn smooth by time. A nocturnal journey through the eternal city. But let's step outside now, into the cooling air, and walk slowly through the city as it prepares for sleep and dreams. The streets that were crowded with activity just hours ago now stretch empty and peaceful under the star-filled sky that arches over the known world. Our footsteps echo softly on the worn stone paving, joining the gentle symphony of night that includes the whisper of wind through marble columns and the distant sound of water moving through aqueducts. Here in these small islands of light in the darkness remind us that life continues its quiet course, generation after generation, in an unbroken chain of simple human moments that connect the past to the present, to the future yet to come. We pass a small shrine at a street corner, where someone has left fresh flowers and a small oil lamp as an offering to the gods who watch over this neighborhood. The flame dances gently in the still air, casting soft shadows on the carved figure of a household god whose stone face has been worn smooth by weather and time. These small acts of devotion, performed daily by ordinary Romans, weave a web of meaning and continuity that connects the mortal and the eternal, the individual and the community, the human and the divine. The temperature drops gradually as we walk, and you can feel the coolness settling into the stones beneath our feet, like a gentle blessing after the day's heat. In a few hours, these same streets will echo with the wheels of carts bringing supplies to the markets. But for now, they rest in peaceful silence, gathering strength for another day of service to the empire's endless needs. Let's make our way toward the Campus Martius, that wide field where Romans gather for assemblies and celebrations during daylight hours. At night, it stretches like a calm sea of grass, dotted with monuments and temples that stand as silent sentinels against the sky. The Pantheon looms nearby, its great dome a marvel of engineering that seems to capture and hold the starlight in its perfect mathematical proportions. As we walk across this open space, feel the soft grass beneath your feet and the gentle night breeze that carries the scent of herbs from distant gardens. The air is clean here, away from the cooking fires and workshops of the city center. You can smell the river flowing nearby, the growing things that connect Rome to the natural world, the earth itself beneath the great works of human hands that have transformed this landscape. Somewhere in the distance, a nightingale begins its liquid song, joined by another, then another, until the darkness fills with their sweet music that speaks of beauty beyond human understanding. Romans love these birds, seeing in their song a reminder that beauty exists for its own sake, needing no human purpose or explanation. The nightingale sings not because it must, but because song is its nature, its gift to the world that listens. The wealthy districts lie quiet and serene, their grand houses set back behind walls and gardens where exotic trees cast intricate shadows in the moonlight. Here, the silence is deeper, more complete, broken only by the splash of ornamental fountains and the whisper of wind through carefully tended groves. Even the rich must eventually surrender to sleep, must let go of their schemes and ambitions and trust themselves to the healing darkness that comes to all humanity. Let's pause by one of these fountains, feeling the cool mist on our faces as the water falls in graceful arcs, catching fragments of starlight like scattered diamonds in the darkness. The sound is hypnotic, constant, soothing, a reminder that some things flow continuously, regardless of human effort or worry. This water began its journey in mountain springs hundreds of miles away, traveled through carefully engineered channels that represent centuries of human skill, and now brings life and beauty to the heart of the empire. Water is sacred to Romans in ways that go beyond mere utility or engineering achievement. They see in its movement a reflection of life itself, always changing, always the same, connecting all things in its endless cycle from cloud to river to sea to cloud again. The aqueducts that bring this water to the city are more than technological marvels. They're lifelines that connect Rome to the mountains, the sky, the eternal rhythms of the natural world that sustain all civilization. As we continue our nighttime journey, passing through neighborhoods where bakers are already beginning their pre-dawn work, we can smell the first bread of tomorrow baking in stone ovens that have been tended continuously for generations. The scent is warm and welcoming, a promise that life will continue, that basic needs will be met, that the cycle of day and rest and day again will turn as it always has, since the first humans learned to grow grain and transform it into sustenance. The night sky above Rome is vast and clear, unmarred by the artificial lights that would one day hide the stars from city dwellers and disconnect them from cosmic rhythms. Here, the Milky Way stretches across the heavens like a bridge of light, and every constellation tells its story to those who know how to read the ancient language of the stars. Romans are skilled navigators and astronomers, understanding that the same forces that govern the movement of celestial bodies also influence human affairs in ways both subtle and profound. Romans are great believers in cycles. The turning of seasons, the phases of the moon, the rise and fall of empires, the eternal return of all things in new forms. They understand that all things pass, but also that all things return transformed by time and experience. Tonight's rest prepares for tomorrow's work. This year's harvest feeds next year's seed. This generation's efforts create the foundation for the next. Death and birth, creation and destruction, growth and decay all participate in the eternal dance of existence that gives meaning to individual lives. Let's climb one of the 7 hills now, moving slowly up the gentle slope as our breathing deepens and our steps grow more deliberate and peaceful. From this height, we can see the city spread below us, dotted with the warm glow of oil lamps and the cooler silver of moonlight on marble walls. The view is timeless, peaceful, filled with the quiet satisfaction that comes from observing life from a distance that provides perspective on daily struggles. Individual concerns fade into proper proportion when seen from this elevation. The worries that seemed so urgent during the day now seem smaller, more manageable, part of a larger pattern that has repeated itself countless times throughout human history. The merchant's anxiety about his shipment from Alexandria, the senator's concern about his political rivals, the mother's worry about her sick child. All of these remain real and important, but they also take their place within the vast tapestry of human experience that extends far beyond any single lifetime. Feel the cool night air on your skin, the solid earth beneath your feet, the vast sky overhead that connects you to infinity. You are part of something much larger than yourself, a chain of human experience that stretches back through time and forward into a future you can only imagine. Your rest tonight connects you to every person who has ever sought peace at the end of a day's work, every family that has gathered around a fire for warmth and companionship, every soul that has looked up at the stars and wondered about their place in the cosmic order. The sleeping city and its dreams. The city below breathes like a sleeping giant, its million inhabitants settling into dreams and rest that will restore their bodies and refresh their spirits for tomorrow's challenges. In humble apartments and grand villas, in servants' quarters and slave dormitories, under rough blankets and fine linens, Romans close their eyes and let consciousness drift away like smoke from dying fires, trusting in the ancient rhythms that govern all life. Some dream of advancement, of climbing the social ladder that defines Roman society and offers hope for improvement. Others dream of simple pleasures, a good meal shared with loved ones, a warm hearth on a cold night, the laughter of children playing in sunlit courtyards. Still others dream of distant places they've heard described by travelers, the green hills of Britain, the deserts of Africa, the snow-capped mountains of Germania, where barbarian tribes live, according to customs that seem strange to Roman eyes. But most simply sleep the deep, restful sleep of people who have used their bodies and minds during the day, who have contributed their small part to the great work of civilization, who have loved and been loved in return. Their sleep is earned, peaceful, restorative, a time when the body repairs itself and the soul communes with mysteries that daylight cannot reveal. Gardens of peace and ancient wisdom. As we make our way back down the hill, moving even more slowly now, our footsteps grow softer, our breathing deeper and more regular. The night has reached its deepest point, when even the most restless spirits find peace and the world settles into complete tranquility. This is the hour when healing happens, when the body's natural rhythms take over and restore what the day's activities have depleted. Let yourself feel the weight of your own day lifting from your shoulders as we walk through the peaceful streets. Whatever challenges you faced, whatever worries you carried, they can rest now like burdens set down at journey's end. Tomorrow will bring new opportunities to address them, but tonight is for letting go, for trusting in the larger rhythms that govern all life, for surrendering to the ancient wisdom that recognizes rest as sacred and necessary. We're walking now through a residential neighborhood where every window is dark, every door is closed, every family has gathered into the safety and warmth of home. The silence is profound, but not empty. It's filled with the presence of sleeping people, with love and rest and dreams, with the accumulated peace of thousands of nights of undisturbed slumber in the heart of the eternal city. This is what the Romans understood about life. It's not just about achievement and advancement, about building monuments that will last forever, or conquering territories that will expand the empire's borders. It's also about the simple daily rhythms that sustain the human spirit. Work and rest, effort and ease, waking and sleeping, the eternal cycle that makes all achievement possible and meaningful. As we continue our gentle walk through the sleeping city, let's visit the gardens that wealthy Romans cultivated with such care and devotion, creating spaces where nature and human artistry blend in perfect harmony. Here, even in darkness, the air is perfumed with night-blooming flowers, jasmine and moonflowers that open their petals to catch the dew, releasing fragrances that seem designed specifically for the quiet hours when the world turns inward and contemplative. The Romans believed that gardens were glimpses of paradise, places where the natural world and human creativity joined in perfect harmony to create something more beautiful than either could achieve alone. These aren't wild spaces, but carefully composed landscapes where every plant, every path, every vista has been chosen to create specific moods and meanings that speak to the soul. The paths wind between carefully tended beds of herbs and flowers, each plant chosen not just for beauty, but for symbolism and significance that layers meaning upon meaning. Rosemary for remembrance, helping the mind hold on to precious memories that give life continuity. Lavender for peace, its gentle scent known to calm troubled spirits and ease the transition into sleep. Mint for hospitality, its fresh fragrance welcoming to guests and family alike. Roses for love in all its forms, passionate, familial, divine. Roman gardens were like living poems, where every element contributed to a larger story about the good life and humanity's relationship with the natural world. Water moves softly through these gardens too, following channels carved in stone with infinite care by craftsmen who understood that the sound of flowing water soothes the human spirit. The water fills small pools where goldfish swim in lazy circles that mirror the eternal patterns of the stars above, their movements hypnotic and peaceful in the lamplight that flickers from nearby buildings. The sound is barely audible now, just a whisper that blends with the sigh of wind through cypress trees planted throughout the garden. These evergreens, with their dark spires reaching toward heaven, symbolize eternal life, a reminder that while individual lives are brief and fragile, life itself continues forever in an endless cycle of renewal that connects all living things across time. Let's sit for a moment on a marble bench, worn smooth by centuries of evening visitors seeking contemplation and peace in this quiet sanctuary. The stone has retained just a hint of warmth from the day's sun, and as you settle against it, you can feel the accumulated tranquility of all the people who have rested here before you. Senators worried about political intrigue, mothers concerned for their children's futures, students pondering philosophical questions that have puzzled humanity since the beginning of thought, lovers planning their lives together in whispered conversations. Each of them found, as you're finding now, that some burdens are too heavy to carry through the night. The Romans had a saying, Nox concilium redit, night brings counsel. They believed that sleep was not just rest for the body, but wisdom for the soul. Problems that seemed impossible during the day often revealed their solutions in the clarity that comes after deep, restorative rest that allows the mind to process experiences and find new perspectives. Above us, the cypress trees sway gently in the night breeze, their dark silhouettes moving against the star-filled sky like nature's own meditation in motion. The leaves rustle with a sound like distant rainfall, creating a natural lullaby that has soothed troubled minds for centuries. Romans often compared this sound to the voices of ancestors, offering comfort and guidance across the boundaries of time and death. The temperature has dropped to that perfect point where the air feels neither warm nor cool against your skin, but simply present. A gentle embrace that supports without demanding attention or effort. This is the temperature that encourages the deepest rest, when the body can focus entirely on repair and renewal rather than maintaining thermal comfort or fighting against environmental stress. As we rise from the bench and continue our walk, notice how your steps have become even slower, your breathing even deeper and more regular. The night has worked its gentle magic, drawing tension from your muscles and worry from your mind like a healer's touch that requires no conscious effort. This is what the Romans called pax nocturna, the peace of night that comes to all who allow themselves to receive it. The river's embrace and sacred night. We're approaching the river now, where the Tiber flows dark and smooth between its stone embankments, carrying the city's reflection on its surface like a moving mirror that shows the stars above and the lights below in perfect unity. The water reflects the few remaining oil lamps in wavering lines of light, creating the illusion that the sky extends downward into infinite depths where all boundaries dissolve. Romans often came to the river at night to think and pray, finding in its constant movement a reminder of life's persistence through all changes and challenges. The water that flows past tonight has traveled from mountain springs through countryside and farmland, carrying with it the essence of all the places it has touched on its journey to the sea. The sound of flowing water has a rhythm that matches the human heartbeat when completely at rest, steady, reliable, eternal, unchanged by the passage of civilizations. As you listen, you might notice your own pulse slowing to match this ancient tempo, your body naturally synchronizing with the rhythms that have sustained all life since the beginning of time. This is the pulse that sustained the Roman Empire for 1,000 years, not the dramatic pace of conquest and politics, but the steady, reliable beat of ordinary life continuing day after day. Small temples line the riverbank, each dedicated to a different aspect of divine protection and blessing. There's one for safe journeys, ensuring that travelers return home safely to their families and loved ones. Another for peaceful sleep, where insomniacs come to pray for rest and relief from the thoughts that keep them awake. A third for prophetic dreams, where those seeking guidance hope to receive wisdom from the gods during the vulnerable hours of sleep, when the soul is most open to divine influence. Romans understood that the night hours were especially sacred, when the boundary between the mortal and divine worlds grew thin, and communication could flow more freely between earth and heaven. They believed that important insights and revelations came most often during sleep, when the conscious mind stepped aside and allowed deeper wisdom to emerge from sources beyond rational understanding. Let's pause at the temple dedicated to Somnus, the god of sleep. It's a simple structure, just 4 columns supporting a triangular roof, but its proportions are mathematically perfect, creating a sense of harmony that calms the spirit just by looking at it. Inside, a small statue shows the god as a young man with wings, holding poppies flowers that induce peaceful rest and sweet dreams. Someone has left a small offering here, a handful of dried lavender and a cup of milk mixed with honey. These simple gifts represent the Roman understanding that sleep is not something we can force or command, but something we must invite and welcome with patience and reverence. The lavender's scent still lingers in the cool air, mixing with the river's earthy smell to create a perfume that speaks directly to the part of the mind that governs rest and dreams. The honey in the offering reminds us of another Roman belief, that sleep should be sweet, not bitter. They knew that carrying anger, resentment, or fear into sleep would poison rest and prevent the healing that should happen during the night hours. So they developed rituals for releasing these negative emotions before bed. Prayers, meditations, acts of forgiveness that cleared the mind for peaceful dreams. As we continue along the riverbank, the sound of water grows softer and more distant, blending with other gentle night sounds that create the symphony of Roman rest. the hoot of an owl bringing messages of wisdom to those who hear it with open hearts, the rustle of small creatures in the reeds, the distant chiming of a temple bell marking the passage of the deep night hours. The Romans believed that every sound in the night had meaning and significance for those who knew how to listen. The owl's call brought wisdom to those who heard it with open hearts. The cricket's chirp promised good fortune for the coming day. The wind's whisper carried messages from the gods, offering guidance and comfort to those who knew how to interpret nature's subtle communications. Walking towards peace in the heart of Rome, we're walking even more slowly now, each step deliberate and peaceful, our movements naturally matching the unhurried rhythm of the sleeping city. The stone beneath our feet has been worn smooth by millions of footsteps over the centuries. Romans walking to work at dawn, returning home at dusk, seeking the river's peace in moments of trouble or celebration. You're part of this ancient procession, connected to every person who has ever found comfort in the eternal city's embrace. The buildings around us seem to radiate a gentle warmth that has nothing to do with fires or lamps, but comes from the accumulated presence of human lives lived within their walls over generations. Families have slept here for centuries. Children have grown to adulthood in these rooms. Love has been shared and losses mourned and joys celebrated. All of this experience has soaked into the stone itself, creating an atmosphere of deep peace and acceptance. Let's turn now and begin our journey back toward the heart of the city, but moving even more slowly than before, as if we're walking through honey or moving underwater where every gesture becomes graceful and deliberate. Each step carries us deeper into tranquility. Each breath brings greater calm and relaxation. The Roman night has worked its ancient magic, drawing us into the rhythm of rest that has sustained human civilization for millennia. As we walk, imagine that with each footstep, you're leaving behind one more concern, one more tension, one more worry from the day. The Romans believed that the night earth could absorb these negative energies, transforming them into nourishment for new growth. Your troubles become compost for tomorrow's possibilities. Your anxieties become fertilizer for future peace and contentment. The city around us sleeps deeply now, its million inhabitants surrendered to dreams and rest that will restore their bodies and refresh their spirits for whatever tomorrow brings. In the imperial palace, the emperor sleeps on silk sheets, but finds the same fundamental peace that comes to the humblest slave on his straw mattress. Sleep is the great equalizer, the reminder that beneath all human differences lies the same need for rest, renewal, and the healing that comes only in darkness. We're approaching the Forum again, but it's been transformed by darkness and silence into something almost mystical. The marble columns rise like frozen music against the star-filled sky, and the statues seem to breathe slightly in the gentle moonlight, as if the great figures of Roman history are stretching and settling into their own eternal rest. The Temple of Vesta glows softly in the center of the Forum, where the sacred fire burns eternally, tended by priestesses who work in shifts through the night to ensure that the heart of Roman civilization never grows cold. Their quiet presence reminds us that some things persist through all changes, offering stability and comfort to each generation in turn. Let's sit on the steps of this temple for a moment, feeling the warm marble beneath us and the cool air on our faces. Here, at the spiritual center of the empire, you can sense the weight of history and the lightness of release existing together in perfect balance. The past and future meet in this moment of rest, creating a sense of timeless peace that transcends all individual concerns. The sacred fire flickers inside the temple, casting dancing shadows that seem to tell stories of their own, tales of heroes and ordinary people, of great deeds and simple kindnesses, of all the human experiences that have unfolded within the protective embrace of Roman civilization. Watching these shadows can induce a meditative state that prepares the mind for prophetic dreams and deep wisdom. As we prepare to complete our night journey through ancient Rome, take one last deep breath of the cool, clear air. Let it fill your lungs completely, then release it slowly, feeling all remaining tension flow out with your breath like smoke dissipating into the vast night sky. You've walked through time tonight, experiencing the eternal rhythms that connect all human experience across the centuries. The Romans understood something profound about the relationship between daily life and cosmic order. They knew that the same forces that govern the movement of stars and seasons also flow through human hearts and minds. By aligning themselves with these natural rhythms, working with the sun, resting with the moon, celebrating the turning seasons, They found a peace that transcended individual circumstances. This peace is available to you too, not as a historical curiosity, but as a living reality that exists in every moment of genuine rest. The same moon that shone on Roman rooftops shines on you tonight. The same stars that guided Roman ships across unknown seas can guide you through any uncertainty. The same rhythms that sustained the eternal city can sustain you through whatever challenges tomorrow may bring. As our imaginary journey through nighttime Rome comes to its close, let yourself feel completely supported by the earth beneath you, completely embraced by the air around you, completely connected to the vast web of human experience that spans all times and places. You are not alone in your need for rest and renewal. You are part of an ancient tradition of seekers who have found in sleep the healing that daylight cannot provide. The Roman city sleeps around us now in complete tranquility, its great works of architecture and engineering at rest, its people surrendered to dreams, its very stones soaked in the accumulated peace of countless peaceful nights. This peace is yours to claim, yours to rest in, yours to carry into whatever dreams may come. The symphony of Roman night. Let the gentle sounds of the eternal city, the whisper of fountain water carrying mountain freshness to the heart of empire, the sigh of wind through marble columns carved by forgotten artisans, the distant chiming of temple bells marking time's passage, carry you now into the deepest rest. You have earned this peace through the day's efforts, just as Romans earned it through theirs 2,000 years ago. And so, as the oil lamps burn low in Roman windows and the stars wheel slowly overhead in their eternal dance, as the river flows eternally toward the sea and the sacred fire burns steadily in its temple, let yourself sink into the same deep rest that has refreshed human souls for centuries beyond counting. The eternal city sleeps, and you can sleep with it, held safely in the arms of time itself, cradled by the accumulated wisdom of all who have found peace in the darkness. Tomorrow will bring new light, new possibilities, new chances to live and love and build something beautiful. But for now, there is only rest, only peace, only the sweet surrender to sleep that connects you to every weary traveler who has ever found refuge in the gentle darkness of night. Sleep well, fellow journeyer through time. The eternal city watches over your dreams, as it has watched over the dreams of countless souls across the centuries. In sleep, we are all Romans, all humans, all children of the same stars that shine down on every generation. Rest now in that ancient peace, that timeless comfort, that eternal promise that tomorrow's sun will rise again over the 7 hills, bringing new hope to the world. The marble grows cool beneath your feet as consciousness fades like lamp smoke into the vast Roman night. The last thing you hear is the sound of water flowing through aqueducts built to last forever, carrying the gift of life from distant mountains to the heart of human civilization. A sound that speaks of continuity, of endurance, of the eternal, rhythms that sustain all things. Let that sound carry you now into dreams of marble halls and cypress gardens, of warm bread and cool fountains, of a world where every day ended with the simple satisfaction of work done and rest earned. Sleep in the peace of ancient Rome, where time moves slowly and the stars remember every soul who has ever looked up at them with wonder. The eternal city rests, and so can you. The marble columns stand their patient watch, the sacred fires burn their eternal vigil, and the Tiber flows on toward the sea, carrying with it the dreams and hopes of all who have ever called Rome home. Sleep now, traveler. Sleep in the arms of eternity, where all roads lead to peace. Dreams of Rome, eternal, in the deepest hour of the Roman night, when even the temple bells have fallen silent and the last oil lamps have flickered out like dying stars, when the city lies wrapped in darkness like a child in its mother's arms, there is only the sound of breathing. 1,000,000 souls rise and fall in the rhythm of sleep, their dreams weaving together into a tapestry of hope and memory that stretches across the centuries like an invisible bridge connecting past to future. Some dream of the past, of ancestors who built this city stone by stone, who carried civilization from the hills of Latium to the ends of the known world with nothing but determination and vision. Others dream of the future, of children not yet born who will walk these same streets, who will drink from these same fountains, who will find in this eternal city the same comfort and belonging that tonight embraces us all like a gentle benediction. But most dream simply of life itself, of sunrise over the 7 hills painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, of fresh bread warm from the oven filling the air with the scent of home, of voices calling across courtyards where families gather, for the evening meal that nourishes both body and soul. These are the dreams that matter most, the dreams that make all the marble and gold and imperial power meaningful and human. For in the end, Rome's greatest achievement was not conquest or architecture, but the simple provision of a place where ordinary people could live ordinary lives in safety and peace. The stars continue their ancient dance overhead, indifferent to human ambition, but somehow benevolent in their constancy, like old friends who have watched over countless generations. They have watched over this city since its legendary founding by Romulus and Remus, and they will watch over it long after its stones have crumbled back to earth and new civilizations have risen in their place. They remember every prayer whispered to the night sky, every hope carried on the wind, every soul that has found rest beneath their ancient light. In the morning, the city will wake again like a sleeping giant stirring to life. The bakers will kindle their ovens before dawn, filling the streets with the aroma of fresh bread. The fountains will catch the first rays of sun, turning water into liquid diamonds. The streets will fill once more with the sounds of commerce and conversation, of life beginning anew with endless possibility. But for now, all is stillness, all is peace, all is the deep contentment that comes to those who understand that this moment, this breath, this heartbeat, this gentle surrender to sleep is all that ever truly exists. Sleep now in the peace of ancient Rome, where every ending is also a beginning, where every night promises a new dawn, where every dream carries within it the seeds of tomorrow's reality. The eternal city keeps its vigil, and you are safe within its embrace, part of the endless story of human hope and endurance that began with the first fire kindled against the darkness and will continue until the last star fades from the sky. Rest well, citizen of time. Rome eternal watches over your sleep, as it has watched over the sleep of senators and slaves, emperors and artisans, mothers and children, all who have found in this ancient place a home for their dreams. In sleep, all distinctions fade away, and we become what we have always been beneath the surface of our daily roles, human souls seeking rest, comfort, and the promise that tomorrow will bring new light to chase away the shadows. The Tiber flows on in its eternal course, carrying with it the reflections of stars and the hopes of generations. The marble columns stand their silent watch, guardians of memory and dream. The sacred fires burn low, but never die, symbols of the eternal spark that connects all living things across the vast expanse of time. Sleep now, and dream of Rome eternal, where the past and future meet in the eternal present of rest and peace. Let the gentle sounds of the sleeping city, the whisper of wind through ancient stones, the distant splash of fountains, the soft breathing of a million souls at rest, carry you into the deepest slumber, where all roads lead home and every journey ends in peace. The eternal city sleeps, and in sleeping, dreams of all who have walked its streets, all who have found shelter within its walls, all who have looked up at its stars and felt themselves part of something larger than their individual lives. Tonight, you are part of that dream, part of that eternal story, part of the endless human search for meaning, beauty, and rest. Sleep well, traveler through time. Rome watches over your dreams.